Jack Carter had never imagined his life would be defined by a single moment. But that day, amidst the wreckage of an interstellar battlefield, his life would change forever. The war with the Vorin Empire had been long and brutal. The humans had finally won, but the cost was high. Entire planets lay in ruins, and countless lives were lost. Jack was a mechanic, not a soldier, but the war had affected everyone. He spent his days repairing ships, fixing weapons, and doing whatever he could to keep the human fleet operational. The battlefield he was scavenging was on a small, uninhabited planet far from the front lines. Jack had been sent to recover anything of use, anything that could help the Terran Federation rebuild. The planet was quiet now, the sounds of explosions and gunfire long gone. Only the eerie silence of the aftermath remained. As Jack moved through the wreckage, his boots crunched over the cracked, blackened earth. He surveyed the remains of the destroyed Vorin ships scattered across the landscape, each one a reminder of the long and deadly conflict. The Vorin were cruel, calculating, and relentless, and Jack couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching him. It was then that he saw her. At first, he thought she was just another casualty, another body among the fallen. But as he got closer, his heart skipped a beat. She wasn't dead. She was still breathing. Her pale purple skin shimmered under the twin suns, her long silver hair tangled in the dirt. She looked fragile, almost ethereal, as if she didn't belong on this war-torn planet. Jack crouched beside her, his hand shaking as he checked her pulse. It was weak, but it was there. She was alive. She couldn't have been older than 20, but the bloodstains on her torn clothes and the severity of her injuries told a different story. Her chest rose and fell in shallow breaths, and her violet eyes fluttered open, locking with his. "Help me," she whispered, her voice barely audible, but filled with desperation. For a moment, Jack hesitated. The Vorin had been the enemy, ruthless invaders who had caused untold suffering. He'd seen what they did to human colonies, to innocent people. Why should he help one of them? But something in her gaze, something that spoke of fear and vulnerability, made him pause. She wasn't like the soldiers he had fought. She wasn't like the faceless enemy he had learned to hate. She was just a girl, a survivor, much like the people he had fought to protect. He sighed and stood up. "I can't leave you here," he muttered to himself. Jack carefully lifted her into his arms, cradling her as gently as he could. She weighed almost nothing, her small frame barely a burden as he carried her toward his ship. The wrecked landscape stretched out before them, and Jack's mind raced. The Federation didn't take kindly to soldiers helping the enemy. If anyone found out he was harboring a Vorin, there would be consequences. But he couldn't just abandon her. Not after seeing those eyes. His ship, a small repair vessel, sat quietly in the distance. Jack quickened his pace, his thoughts focused on getting them both safely aboard. He knew he was taking a risk, but it didn't matter. For the first time in a long while, he felt a sense of purpose beyond the endless war. Once inside, Jack laid her gently on the examination table. The ship was basic, not equipped for serious medical care, but he had a few supplies. He quickly got to work, cleaning her wounds and patching her up as best as he could. She didn't stir, not even when he applied a local anesthetic to her arm, but he could see the faint rise and fall of her chest, and he hoped that was a good sign. Hours passed, and Jack watched her, his mind filled with questions. Why had she been alone on the battlefield? Why had she survived when so many others hadn't? The Vorin soldiers had always fought in groups. They were a highly organized military, ruthless in their tactics. It didn't make sense. As the night wore on, Jack finally gave in to exhaustion. He slumped in the pilot's chair, staring at the stars outside the ship's window. He had to admit, he didn't know what he was doing. He'd saved her, yes, but what now? What was he supposed to do with her? She was the enemy, and no matter how much he'd helped her, the Vorin wouldn't see it that way. Suddenly, a soft sound broke the silence. Jack turned to see her eyes open again, her violet gaze locking onto his. She didn't speak at first, just stared at him, her expression unreadable. "You saved me," she said, her voice still weak but steady. "Why?" Jack didn't have an answer for her, not one that made sense. He shrugged. "I couldn't just leave you there." She looked at him for a long moment, her eyes softening. "You're different from the others," she murmured. Jack didn't know how to respond to that. He wasn't different from the others. He was just a mechanic who had stumbled across a girl in need of help, but something about her words stuck with him. And as she drifted back to sleep, Jack couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning of something he couldn't yet understand. The days that followed were filled with tension. Jack had always been alone in space, working on ships, fixing engines, and keeping to himself. But now he had a passenger. And not just any passenger. The girl he had saved from the battlefield was a Vorin, an alien from the enemy empire, and Jack didn't know what to do with her. Kyra, as she had introduced herself, seemed quiet but strong. She stayed in the small room Jack had set up for her aboard the ship, resting and recovering. Her wounds were healing, though the scars on her pale purple skin would remain as reminders of the battle. Jack checked on her often, but he could see that she didn't want to talk much. There was a strange heaviness in the air whenever she spoke. Maybe she was still in shock, or maybe it was something deeper. Days passed, and Jack couldn't help but feel uneasy. His decision to bring her aboard the ship was dangerous. If anyone found out that he was helping a Vorin, he'd be labeled a traitor. And there were plenty of people out there who wouldn't hesitate to make an example of him. He tried to push the worry out of his mind, focusing on repairing his ship and making sure Kyra was well taken care of. She seemed to appreciate the little things he did for her. A blanket, a meal, even just a kind word. Despite the language barrier, they were beginning to understand each other. She spoke with a soft voice, though her words always held a certain calmness that Jack admired. But everything changed the day Jack's communication system beeped. It was a coded message from the Terran Federation. The message was short, but the meaning was clear. They had discovered the rogue mechanic who was harboring a Vorin enemy. They gave him an ultimatum: hand her over, or they would send a team to find him. Jack stared at the message, feeling a chill run down his spine. They were coming. They knew. And soon, they would be here. He rushed to the cockpit, his hands shaking as he brought the ship's engines online. Kara appeared in the doorway, her dark eyes full of concern as she stepped into the small control room. "What's happening?" she asked softly, her voice still faint but clear. "They're coming," Jack replied, his voice tense. "The Federation. They know I've been helping you. I don't have much time." Kyra's face turned pale, but she didn't panic. Instead, she stepped closer to Jack and placed a hand on his shoulder. "We need to leave. Fast." Jack turned to her, his eyes wide with surprise. "Leave? We can't just run forever. They'll track us down." Kyra gave him a hard look, her gaze steely and focused. "We don't have a choice. They won't stop until they have me." Jack knew she was right, but that didn't make it easier. They had only one option: escape. He pushed the ship's throttle forward, the engines roaring to life as they shot into the vast emptiness of space. Jack knew it wouldn't be long before the Federation sent ships after them, but he also knew that his best chance was to keep moving. He didn't have a plan, but he was good at improvising. The stars blurred as they entered faster than light travel, and Jack set the ship on course for the nearest neutral zone, a lawless sector of space where fugitives and outcasts could hide. It was dangerous, but it was the only place they might have a chance of evading capture. Kyra sat in the co-pilot's seat, watching him intently. Her violet eyes never left him. And for a moment, Jack felt the weight of her gaze like a silent understanding. They were both running now, running from their pasts, from their worlds, from the war that had torn everything apart. But somehow, Jack felt that they were in this together. The silence between them was thick. Jack didn't know what to say. He didn't know if there were any words that could explain what was happening. He had no idea why he had risked everything for her, why he had defied orders and brought her aboard his ship, but he couldn't help it. Something about her called to him, something deeper than just the fact that she was in danger. Maybe it was because she was different from the Vorin soldiers he had fought against. Maybe it was because she wasn't just a warrior. She was a person, a survivor, just like him. Kyra broke the silence first, her voice steady but soft. "You don't have to do this. I can leave. You don't have to risk your life for me." Jack looked at her, surprised by her words. "You really think I'd just turn you over to them, after everything you've been through?" She didn't answer right away, but Jack could see the sadness in her eyes. She had been abandoned by her people, betrayed by her family, and now she was a fugitive. No one had ever offered her kindness before, and the idea that someone would do so now, it was almost too much for her to understand. Jack shook his head, his resolve strengthening. "I don't care about the Federation. I care about you." Kyra looked at him, her lips pressing into a thin line, as if she were trying to hold back something. Maybe it was gratitude, or maybe it was something more. Jack didn't know. But as he looked at her, he knew that there was no turning back. He had made his choice, and now he had to live with it. The ship sped through the stars, the hum of the engines the only sound in the quiet cockpit. Jack kept his eyes on the star map, calculating their course, while Kara stayed silent beside him. Both of them knew what was at stake. Both of them knew that their journey had only just begun. And as they flew deeper into the unknown reaches of space, Jack couldn't help but wonder what would happen next. Would they make it to the neutral zone? Would they ever find peace? Or would the war they had left behind catch up to them in the end? The days in space were passing quickly, and Jack found himself adjusting to a new kind of life. The quiet hum of the engines, the endless stretch of stars outside, and the company of Kyra. It was a strange new reality. She had recovered faster than he expected, her wounds healing well, though her mind was still troubled. Jack could see it in her eyes. The weight of everything that had happened to her, the loss, the betrayal, and the constant fear that someone would come for her. But despite her inner struggles, Kyra was strong. She had a quiet strength that Jack couldn't help but admire. She didn't complain or ask for pity. Instead, she spent her time learning about the ship, helping Jack with repairs, and reading whatever books she could find in the small library he kept. Sometimes she would sit in the control room, staring out at the stars, her face reflecting a quiet sadness Jack couldn't fully understand. Jack didn't know what to make of all this. One moment, he was just a mechanic, repairing ships and keeping to himself. The next, he was on the run, evading both the Federation and the Vorin Empire. And suddenly, he had a companion, a fugitive from the very people he had fought against. But things between them were changing. Slowly, they began to talk more, and in those conversations, Jack found himself learning about Kara in ways he hadn't expected. She wasn't just a soldier or a noble's daughter. She had dreams, hopes, and fears. She loved the stars, the feeling of weightlessness, and the quiet beauty of space. She told Jack stories of her home planet, of the colorful landscapes, and the ancient ruins her people had built long before the war. It was a world far different from the one Jack knew. The more they talked, the more Jack realized how little he understood about the Vorin. They were the enemy, the invaders who had torn apart countless human colonies, and Jack had learned to hate them, to see them as nothing more than a threat to humanity's survival. But Kyra was different. She wasn't like the cold, ruthless soldiers he had fought against. She wasn't a faceless enemy. She was just a girl, a survivor, and the longer Jack spent with her, the more he realized how little he truly knew about the war. One evening, as they sat together in the mess hall, Kyra spoke up. Her voice was quiet, almost hesitant. "Jack," she said, "I need to ask you something." Jack looked up from his food, noticing the serious expression on her face. "What is it?" Kyra took a deep breath before speaking again. "Why did you help me? You didn't have to." Jack didn't have an immediate answer. He had asked himself that very question more than once. Why had he helped her? Why had he risked everything for a stranger? An enemy, no less. He put down his food, looking at her. "I don't really know," he admitted. "Maybe it was because you were hurt, and I couldn't just leave you there. Or maybe it was because, I don't know. There's something about you, Kyra. You're different from the others. I didn't see an enemy when I looked at you. I saw someone who needed help." Kyra was silent for a long moment, her eyes searching his face. Then she spoke softly. "Thank you. I don't know what I would have done without you." Jack felt a weight lift off his shoulders. It wasn't much, but hearing her say those words meant something. He had been afraid that she would think he was just another soldier following orders, doing what was expected. But that wasn't the case. He had helped her because he wanted to, because he believed in doing what was right, even if it went against everything he had been taught. Over the next few weeks, Jack and Kara's bond grew stronger. They spent their days working together, fixing the ship, keeping it running as they moved deeper into space. They talked more, laughed more, and began to share things about their pasts, things that neither of them had ever told anyone before. Jack learned that Kyra had been born into a noble family, the daughter of a high-ranking foreign official. But when she was just a child, her father had been betrayed, and her family had fallen out of favor. Her life had been full of politics and power struggles, and she had never really known what it was like to live freely. The war had only made things worse. She had been forced to fight for a cause she didn't believe in. And in the end, it had all fallen apart. For the first time, Jack saw the full picture. Kyra wasn't just a victim of the war. She was a casualty of a system that had failed her. She had been used, just like so many others, and now she was running, trying to escape the past that haunted her. Kyra, in turn, learned about Jack's life. He wasn't a soldier by choice. He had been drafted into the war like so many others. He had joined the Federation not out of patriotism, but because he didn't have a choice. He had always loved working with his hands, fixing things, and taking care of the machinery that kept everything running. He didn't care much for the politics or the grand ideals of war. All he cared about was doing his job and keeping people safe. Their shared stories, their struggles, and their dreams began to forge a deeper connection between them. It was more than just survival now. It was something real, something that went beyond the war and the enemies they had once been taught to fear. One evening, as they sat together on the observation deck, watching the stars, Kyra spoke again, her voice softer this time. "You know," she said, "I never thought I would be here with you. I never thought anyone would care about me, especially not a human." Jack looked at her, his voice steady but gentle. "Maybe we're not so different after all." Kyra smiled, a small but genuine smile. And in that moment, Jack realized that he wasn't just helping her to escape the war. He was helping her to find herself again. And in some strange way, she was doing the same for him. The days had started to blur together. The vastness of space stretched out before Jack and Kara like an endless ocean, and they kept moving, trying to stay one step ahead of their pursuers. But despite the freedom they found in the stars, the weight of their situation was always on their minds. Kyra had become more and more distant as time passed, her quiet demeanor giving way to moments of restlessness. She would often retreat to the ship's small observation deck, staring out at the stars for hours, lost in her thoughts. Jack understood. She had been running for so long, and the fear of capture was always with her, but he could see the toll it was taking on her. The war, her past, the constant flight. It was a lot for anyone to handle. And it was taking its toll on him too. Every time the ship's sensors beeped with a warning, his heart would race. Every shadow in the distance felt like a threat. Jack wasn't a soldier. He was a mechanic, a simple man who had never asked for any of this. But now he was living a life on the run, and it felt like the weight of the galaxy was pressing down on him. One evening, as the ship drifted through a quiet sector of space, the calm was shattered by a loud alarm. Jack rushed to the control room, his heart pounding in his chest. The sensor readouts showed several ships closing in on their position, their intentions clear. Kyra appeared in the doorway, her face pale. "They found us," she said quietly, her voice almost a whisper. Jack didn't answer. He didn't need to. He could already hear the unmistakable hum of enemy engines growing louder, and his mind raced through the possible ways out. But there were no easy solutions. They were outnumbered, and there was no place to hide. They couldn't outrun them. "Jack, what do we do?" Kyra asked, stepping closer. He turned to her, his face grim. "We fight," he said, his voice steady but filled with determination. "We fight to survive." Kyra looked at him, her expression unreadable. For a moment, Jack wondered if she was thinking of her past, of the Voran Empire, and of the battles she had fought before. But she didn't hesitate. She nodded, her eyes hardening with resolve. Jack set to work immediately. He activated the ship's weapons systems, a small set of turrets and shields designed for basic defense. It wasn't much, but it would have to do. He didn't have the firepower of a military ship, but he knew how to use what he had. Kyra moved to the co-pilot's seat, her fingers flying over the control panel as she assisted Jack. She had been a skilled fighter before. He could see that now. The calm confidence in her movements as she worked alongside him made Jack realize just how much more she was capable of than he had first thought. "We need to get to that asteroid field," Jack said, his mind calculating their options. "It'll be a tight squeeze, but if we can make it, the asteroids will block their sensors. We can lose them there." Kyra didn't argue. She simply nodded, her face set in a determined expression. Jack punched in the coordinates and pushed the ship forward, steering them toward the asteroid field in the distance. The sound of enemy ships closing in grew louder. Jack could feel the tension building in his chest as he piloted the ship through the dark expanse of space. The asteroid field loomed ahead, a chaotic tangle of rocks and debris that could either be their salvation or their doom. As they entered the field, Jack's hands gripped the controls tightly. The ship weaved in and out of the floating rocks, narrowly avoiding collisions. It was a delicate dance, but Jack was good at this. He had spent years flying through dangerous sectors, repairing ships under fire. He wasn't afraid of a little danger. Behind them, the enemy ships were closing in. Jack could see their bright energy signatures blinking on the screen, their weapons ready to fire. They were getting too close. Kyra's voice cut through the tension. "They're locking onto us. Prepare to dodge." "Hold on," Jack shouted, his heart racing as he jerked the ship to the side, narrowly avoiding a blast from the enemy ships. The ship lurched under the force of the maneuver, but Jack kept his focus, weaving them through the maze of asteroids. The enemy ships followed closely, firing their weapons and trying to hit their target, but the asteroid field provided some cover. The blasts exploded against the rocks, sending pieces of debris flying through space. "We can't keep this up forever," Kyra warned. "They'll catch us if we don't find a way out." Jack's mind raced as he considered their options. The asteroid field was their best chance, but it wouldn't last long. The enemy was persistent, and they had far more firepower than Jack's ship. "We need to create a diversion," Jack said, his voice sharp with urgency. He glanced over at Kyra. "Can you get to the weapons systems and fire at the largest asteroid in front of us? Aim for the core. It'll cause an explosion big enough to scatter the enemy ships." Kyra didn't hesitate. She immediately turned to the weapons control panel and began working quickly. Jack knew she was capable, but he couldn't help but feel a tight knot of worry in his chest. Moments later, Kyra fired a shot at the largest asteroid in their path. The explosion was massive, sending a shockwave of debris flying in all directions. The enemy ships hesitated, momentarily distracted by the blast and the falling rocks. "Now's our chance," Jack shouted. He pushed the throttle forward, guiding the ship through the chaos of flying debris, hoping they could break free before the enemy could recover. For a moment, it seemed like the plan might work. The enemy ships scattered, struggling to navigate through the debris. But just as Jack thought they had a chance, the sensors beeped again. More ships were arriving. The battle was far from over. The battle in the asteroid field had bought them some time, but Jack knew it wasn't enough. The enemy ships were regrouping, and more were on the way. They needed to find a safe place, quickly. But where could they go? The universe was vast, but the Federation's reach was even greater. Kyra stood beside Jack in the control room, her eyes scanning the readouts on the monitor. The tension in the air was palpable. Jack's mind raced as he searched for a way out, his fingers gripping the controls so tightly that his knuckles turned white. He had always prided himself on being able to think on his feet, to find a solution when there seemed to be no way out. But this time, he wasn't sure. "We can't outrun them forever," Jack said, his voice filled with frustration. "We need to think of something else, or they'll catch us." Kyra didn't speak at first. She was looking at the screen, deep in thought. Jack could see the gears turning in her mind. She had been through far worse than this. She had fought battles, escaped enemies, and survived. She wasn't afraid of danger. She was used to it. "I know a place," she said finally, her voice calm but firm. Jack turned to her, surprised. "A place? Where?" "A neutral zone," Kyra explained. "A place where neither the Federation nor the Vorin have any power. It's a black market sector. Dangerous, but it's the only place we might be able to hide for a while." Jack's eyes narrowed. "A black market? That sounds risky." "It is," Kyra admitted, "but it's our best option. The people there don't ask questions. They don't care who you are, as long as you have credits or something valuable to trade." Jack hesitated. It was a dangerous gamble. But at this point, what other choice did they have? "All right," Jack said, his voice resolute. "Set the course. Let's go." Kyra nodded, her fingers flying over the control panel as she entered the coordinates for the neutral zone. Jack kept his eyes on the sensor readings, watching for any signs of enemy ships. They had to move fast. The ship's engines hummed as it powered up, and soon they were speeding through space, away from the asteroid field, and toward the unknown. The stars outside the window blurred as they entered faster than light travel, the ship surging ahead. Jack kept his focus, trying to ignore the unease settling in his stomach. They were taking a huge risk, but it was the only option. The journey was tense. Jack and Kyra didn't speak much. There wasn't much to say. They were both too focused on the task at hand, too aware of the danger that was still chasing them. After what felt like an eternity, the ship finally dropped out of faster-than-light travel. The neutral zone was ahead, a cluster of ships and stations floating in the void, surrounded by debris and lawlessness. It was a place where the Federation didn't dare go, and where the Vorin didn't have control. It was a place where survival meant knowing who to trust and who to avoid. Kyra guided the ship into the sector, weaving through the scattered ships and debris. Jack's eyes darted from the screen to the stars outside, scanning for any signs of danger. He knew that even here, in the heart of the neutral zone, there were risks. Pirates, smugglers, bounty hunters. There was no telling who they might run into. As they navigated through the sector, Jack's mind kept returning to the same thought. How much longer could they keep running? How much longer could they hide? The Federation's reach was vast, and sooner or later, they would catch up. And when they did, there would be no place left to hide. "Where exactly are we going?" Jack asked, his voice low. "There's a station in the center of the zone," Kyra replied. "It's called the Pit. It's not much to look at, but it's where all the outcasts go, people who need to disappear." The Pit. Jack raised an eyebrow. Sounds inviting. Kyra gave a faint smile. "It's not glamorous, but it'll do. We'll blend in. Nobody will ask any questions." Jack wasn't convinced, but he didn't have a better idea. "All right, take us there." Kyra nodded and steered the ship toward the station. As they approached, the station came into view, a large rusted structure floating among the wreckage of old ships and space debris. It looked like a place that had been cobbled together from whatever materials people could scrounge up. The lights flickered, and the air outside seemed thick with the smell of oil and burnt metal. Jack could already see several ships docked at the station. Small, unmarked vessels, some of them looking as battered as his own. He could also see several larger ships hanging in the distance, ships that probably belonged to pirates or other unsavory types. It wasn't a place for the faint of heart, but it was a place where people like him, and Kyra, could disappear. Kyra brought the ship in for a landing, her hand steady on the controls. "Here we are," she said. Jack took a deep breath. The station was a place of no rules, where everyone was trying to survive in their own way. It was a place that could offer them shelter, but at what cost? As they docked, Kyra turned to Jack. "We need to be careful here. These people won't hesitate to turn us in if they think there's money in it for them." Jack nodded, already thinking about the dangers that lay ahead. But at least for now, they had a brief moment of safety. It was enough. For the time being, they were free. The pit wasn't what Jack had expected. It was worse. The station's exterior was rusted, its halls dimly lit by flickering lights that seemed to barely function. The air smelled stale, and the hum of machines echoed through the narrow corridors. It was a place that smelled of desperation. Jack and Kyra stepped off the ship and into the chaos. People moved quickly around them. Smugglers, traders, outcasts, all of them with their own agendas. No one looked twice at them. And Jack could already tell that in this place, blending in wouldn't be a problem. It wasn't a place for heroes or fugitives. It was a place for those who wanted to disappear. They walked through the station, avoiding any attention. Kyra knew where they needed to go, and Jack followed her closely, keeping his eyes open for any signs of trouble. The station was filled with all kinds of people. Some looked human, some didn't. There were more than a few rough-looking characters, all of them with a dangerous air about them. "This is it," Kyra said, stopping in front of a small door at the end of a dark hallway. "We need to speak with the station's handler. He's the one who can get us safe passage or hide us from the Federation." Jack raised an eyebrow. "And what exactly do we need to trade for that?" Kyra hesitated for a moment, her eyes scanning the hallway before answering. "Information, or credits, or something valuable." Jack wasn't sure he liked the sound of that, but he didn't have much choice. "Let's get this over with." They stepped inside. The room was small, dimly lit, and smelled of burnt coffee and stale air. Behind a cluttered desk sat a man, his back to them. He looked like he had seen too many years of hard living, his hair unkempt, and his face weathered. The man turned as they entered, his eyes sharp and calculating. "You two looking for something?" he asked, his voice gruff. Kyra stepped forward. "We need to get off this station, and we need to stay hidden. Can you help us?" The man eyed her warily. "Depends. What do you have to offer?" Jack could feel Kyra tense beside him. "We have information. About the Federation. And about the Vorin." The man raised an eyebrow. "Information, huh? What kind of information?" Kyra hesitated again. Jack could see that she was trying to decide how much to say. Finally, she spoke. "I know about a Federation Black Ops mission," she said, her voice steady but quiet. "A mission that could change the balance of power. Something big. Something they don't want anyone to know." The man's eyes narrowed. "You're not just a fugitive, are you? You're a traitor too." Kyra didn't flinch. "You want the information, or not?" The man leaned back in his chair, considering. Finally, he stood up and walked over to a locked cabinet on the far side of the room. He unlocked it and pulled out a small datapad. He turned back to Kyra and Jack. "All right. You've got a deal," he said, tossing the datapad on the desk. "This will get you passage off this station, but you'll need to lay low for a while. Trust no one, especially in a place like this." Jack glanced at Kyra, who nodded. "We understand." The man didn't smile. "Good. Now get out of here before anyone catches wind of what you're up to." Jack grabbed the data pad, and he and Kira quickly left the room. As they walked down the hallway, Jack couldn't shake the feeling that they had just stepped deeper into something dangerous. The Federation and the Vorin were enemies, but now they were both involved in a game bigger than anything Jack had imagined. Information, power, and secrets. This was no longer just about survival. It was about something much more dangerous. Once they were back in the quieter part of the station, Kyra spoke up. "We need to move fast. The longer we stay here, the more likely it is that someone will realize who we are. We can't risk staying in one place too long." Jack nodded. "Where do we go next?" Kyra looked at the data pad in her hand. "We need to find a contact in the Outer Rim, a place called Skyport. It's far enough out of the Federation's reach that we can regroup and figure out what to do next." Jack wasn't sure about this whole plan. It felt like they were being led further and further into a trap, but he knew that if they didn't follow through, they would be back to square one, running from the Federation and the Vorin with no real plan. "We leave now, then," Jack said, his voice firm. "Let's get out of here before anyone knows we're gone." They made their way back to the ship. As they left the station behind, the uneasy feeling in Jack's stomach only grew. The pit was a dangerous place, and even though they had what they needed to leave, there was no telling what the future held. But there was something else on Jack's mind, something that Kyra had said earlier, about the Federation, about the mission that could change everything. What was it that she knew? What was it that the Federation didn't want anyone to know? Jack couldn't shake the feeling that they had just uncovered something much bigger than either of them had expected. The information Kyra had offered was worth more than credits. It was the key to something that could change the fate of the galaxy. And if the wrong people found out, they could be in even more danger than before. Jack looked over at Kyra as the ship powered up. She was focused, determined, but Jack could see the weight of what they were carrying. He didn't know what kind of mission this was, or how deep the Federation's secrets ran, but one thing was clear. They weren't just running anymore. They were part of something much larger, and the price of their freedom would be higher than they could ever imagine. The journey to Skyport felt endless. The ship hummed steadily as it moved through the cold expanse of space. Jack sat in the cockpit, staring out at the stars. There was something soothing about the endless blackness, something peaceful. But peace was something he hadn't known for a long time. Kyra sat beside him, her eyes focused on the data pad in her hands. Jack glanced over at her. She seemed lost in thought, her brow furrowed in concentration as she reviewed the information they had acquired. Jack had learned that the Federation wasn't just a government. It was an empire, one that controlled not only the fate of entire worlds, but also the lives of countless people. And now, they were tangled in something much bigger than just escaping the war. "What's on your mind?" Jack asked, breaking the silence. Kyra looked up, meeting his gaze. There was a sadness in her eyes, something deep, something hidden. "Just thinking about what comes next," she said quietly. "I spent so much of my life running from something. From people. From the war. Now that we have this information, it feels like the stakes are higher than ever." Jack nodded, his mind replaying the mission she had mentioned before. The one that could change everything. The one the Federation didn't want anyone to know about. "I don't like how much we don't know," he said, his voice full of concern. "The more we dig into this, the more dangerous it feels." Kyra was silent for a moment, then spoke softly. "I've seen enough to know that the Federation isn't what it seems. They control everything. Trade, politics, even the news. And now they're hiding something important, something they'll do anything to protect." Jack looked at her, a new understanding in his eyes. "You've seen this kind of thing before, haven't you? The way they manipulate everything, keep secrets. I can see it in your eyes." Kyra didn't answer at first. She just looked down at the data pad, her fingers tracing the screen slowly. "I've seen a lot," she said finally. "Too much." Jack didn't press her. He knew she had a past she wasn't ready to share. Maybe, just maybe, that's why she had offered to marry him. She was running from something that haunted her, and he could feel it every time she spoke about the Federation or the war. But what mattered now was that they were in this together, and they had to figure out what the next move would be. As they neared Skyport, Jack started to feel a shift in the air. The station loomed ahead, a massive structure nestled in the center of the outer rim. Unlike the dark, dangerous pit, Skyport was a bustling hub of activity. Ships of all sizes docked and left in a constant flow, and people milled about, moving with purpose, most of them unaware of the deeper dangers lurking in the shadows. Kyra guided the ship toward the landing docks, her hand steady on the controls. Jack sat back in his seat, watching the activity below. He knew that this place could be their safe haven, but he also knew that it could turn into their tomb if they weren't careful. There were too many unknowns, and they couldn't afford to trust anyone. The ship touched down with a soft thud, and the engines powered down. Kyra immediately started gathering the necessary equipment, securing the weapons and supplies they would need. Jack followed her, his mind still racing. He didn't know what to expect once they stepped out of the ship, but he knew one thing for sure. Skyport was a crossroads, and their next choices would determine whether they lived or died. As they disembarked from the ship, the station's noise hit them like a wave. There was a low hum of engines, the chatter of people in various languages, and the clatter of metal against metal. Skyport was a chaotic mess of life, and it felt like every person had their own agenda. Kyra motioned for Jack to follow her as she moved toward a quieter area of the station, a series of corridors that seemed less crowded. It was here, in the back of the station, that they would meet the contact who could help them figure out what to do next. They stopped in front of a small door, unmarked and plain, tucked away in the shadows. Kyra pressed a button, and the door slid open, revealing a small, dimly lit room. Inside, a man stood waiting, his face hidden in the shadows, but Jack could feel the weight of his presence. "Are you the ones who have the information?" the man asked, his voice low and controlled. Kyra nodded. "We have it, but we need to know what to do next. We can't keep running." The man studied them for a moment, then motioned for them to sit. "This is bigger than you think," he said, his eyes glinting with a dangerous knowledge. "The Federation has been working on something for years, something they want to keep hidden at all costs. But you're not the only ones looking for answers, and you're not the only ones being hunted." Jack tensed. "What do you mean?" The man leaned forward, his voice dropping to a whisper. "There are more like you, people who know what the Federation is hiding, and they're all out there, waiting for the right moment to strike." Kyra's expression darkened. "What are you saying? That we're part of something bigger?" The man nodded slowly. "Yes, but be careful. The Federation will stop at nothing to keep their secrets, and those who try to expose them are the most dangerous targets of all." Jack and Kyra exchanged a look. They had known the stakes were high, but now it was clear that they had stumbled into something much larger than they had ever imagined. "We're in this together," Jack said quietly, his voice steady. Kyra didn't say anything at first, but she gave him a small nod. They both knew that whatever came next, they couldn't back down. The Federation had their secrets, but Jack and Kyra had each other, and they weren't going to stop until the truth came out.